Hey, Rebels, welcome back to the channel. I got some fun things for you this week, so I guess we'll just dive right in. There's not a whole lot to report, but there's just kind of some fun anecdotal things that I kind of wanted to go over. Anyhow, in the group earlier, I had texted on the day to watch out for the full moon, and it's really interesting to see this happen because if you go back in history, a lot of times when the market's chopping around, the full moon will mark tops, and the new moon will mark the bottoms. It's just kind of a strange occurrence that happens. So I haven't done a lot of research on that, but I'm sure you can go and back test that as far as you want to and dive as deep into that rabbit hole as you want to. I've heard other analysis, speak on it, and I've reviewed it myself and gone over those periods of time, and it's just interesting. So, if I'm zooming in, last week we had this nice rally off here, and this was looking really strong, especially on this candle. And it was like, oh man, it looks like we're really close to breaking into some fresh highs, and maybe we're going to get that next acceleration that everybody's waiting for. But in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, we got this full moon coming up. How could that play a role? This is already a major resistance level, and if we happen to see kind of some resistance during those full moon times, what could possibly happen? So I did mention that in the group, to look out for a top coming on the full moon, and that is what transpired. So it's just an interesting kind of anecdotal thing that I wanted to mention. Some other anecdotal things as well. Well, actually, one thing that is anecdotal going back to this point is I believe it's associated. This quote is associated with J.P. Morgan. Now, whether he actually said this or not, I can't verify that, and I'm not sure if it is fully verified. But anyway, there's a quote by J.P. Morgan that says, "Billionaire or millionaires don't study astrology, billionaires do." And I just thought that that was an interesting thing. Now, whether or not they're studying astrology and using these moon patterns to make their money or not, I have no idea. But it is interesting too that the 18.6-year real estate cycle that I've been tracking corresponds to an 18.6 lunar cycle. So anyway, I would like to dive more deep into that. I think that's a fun topic. And whether or not it can make us money in the future will be seen. But either way, it's kind of a fun thing to think about. The other thing that happened this week, a couple things, is Elon Musk had calls for a recession, which he's done several times, but the last time I think was around here. And the thing that why I want to bring that up is because it's typically after the market's been going down for a very long time, almost a year. Yeah, well, maybe not quite a year. It was anyhow, it had been going down for a long time. I think this whole bear market was, yeah, roughly a year from November 2021 to November 2022. But anyway, about halfway down, and most of the way down as far as percentage terms, he was calling for a recession. And that happens a lot where it's not until prices have fallen so far and things so dire and the market sentiment is so shitty that people start calling for recession. And I want to say that that's also typically inversely happens at the tops. A lot of people around here and around here and around here. I mean, basically every major top that we've seen, retail and the news headlines, not news headlines typically, but at least retail in the space. Everybody's worried about this is it. This is the end. There's kind of this bear porn thing that happens in these bull markets where, the bears kind of sound sexy. This sounds smart. Like, oh, this is going to have to top here because of this, and that. And they're going to give you some reason why the market can't possibly go up and it's got to crash. And they end up just being bearish the entire way. And then they kind of basically have to stick to their thesis that the market's going down and eventually they'll be right, But meanwhile, Bitcoin's gone up a 6x, So it's just not the game that you want to play pretty much in any market, is to be super bearish, especially in a bull. You don't want to be bearish in a bull market. You don't want to be trying to call tops in a bull market. It's a very dangerous thing to do. As you can see, every single time, we've seen higher prices eventually, just going back in history. So anyway, something I wanted to bring up there, and that typically happens. So I'm not seeing this as a top because typically at the top, everybody thinks it can't go any further. That's what happened back here, basically. Not cycle top, but everybody was convinced that prices were going to keep going, right? And that kind of marked a more significant top. That same sentiment happened about around here, and I haven't really seen that sentiment since this time. I haven't seen that this is going to go on forever, thesis. That's what people get into. I mean, as the market climbs higher and higher, people's price predictions get higher and higher and wilder and wilder. Michael Saylor just had an interview recently where he was talking about how, bear markets are over for Bitcoin. There's just going to be a constant bid and it's only going to go up. It's going to go to $1 million, and we're just over that. We're over that phase of there being bear markets in Bitcoin. which is outrageous because every single market in the entire history of the world has always had bear markets through its entire history. That's just how markets go. So that is the kind of talk that will happen more and more and more as we progress into the mania phase of this bull market. I guess the final push, there's usually one final blast, and that's basically what we're in right now, is the fifth and final wave of this bull market. So I just kind of thought that that was interesting, and it just ties into market psychology so much that Elon's calling for a recession makes me think that, well, he hasn't ever called it, and most economists don't ever call the recessions correctly. Usually you're done with the recession or in a recession, or the recession's over by the time it gets called. So anyway, if you're listening to the news, that's the other point, is it's not going to help you, right? One other small little thing that's on here is a Gann seasonal date. Gann, who's the guy I follow as far as the analysis goes, he has many seasonal dates, which I have to do a lot more study on this as well. But one of them is the solstice. And what you can see around these seasonal dates, basically, he's noticed turning points or increased volatility. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Does it need to mark a major bottom? No, not necessarily. Does it need to mark a major top? Not necessarily. Sometimes they'll just be little blips like this, but it'll still call it, and that will be a pivot point. So it's just kind of something to have in the back of your tool belt as you're following the markets, same thing kind of with the full moon thing. Like this move didn't surprise me, and so it didn't shake me out of my position. So the more I know about markets and how they operate and some things that can happen during seasonal times, it just helps stay on the right side of the trend. I mean, zooming out, we're obviously in a bull market forming higher lows the whole way. And so we haven't had any macro breakdowns. So there hasn't been any macro signal to suggest otherwise. So the final thing on this chart that I wanted to bring up is I have this speed line basically from this low to this high, and I'm projecting it from this low to kind of see, well, how does this move compare? And so far, even with all this FUD that's been happening and all this scary news, Bitcoin hasn't really gone very high, even though it's consolidating above $100,000 in fresh high prices. It's consolidating in strength. It is clearly a stronger move because it is above this line. You can see how the price action over here kind of wiggled around it and made its way to the top. It was a slower move than this move. This, if it does, it may not feel like it, but the data is saying that this is actually a stronger move, faster move for now. That's why we have to kind of read the tape as it comes. And so, when we were getting up in this area, I had mentioned on the channel that I'm not really expecting to see much higher prices very soon because we have this, this resistance line that goes back, years from all these old tops. This actually goes from the 2017 top to the 2021 top. Project that out, and Bitcoin has never broken above that trend line. We may be in for a historical ride where we finally break out of this pattern for temporarily, while the bull market progresses and we get into that more mania phase. We'll have to see. Nothing saying that it has to. I have a feeling that it will because I think we're early, and I'll show you some other reasons for that as the video goes on. But the point is, what can happen is you have this speed line here. What can happen is this thing can kind of just consolidate sometime and use time to go sideways basically until we hit this line, possibly as support. This has actually happened before during this run up where I had the same kind of speed line coming and it was a little bit faster, and we came up to a spell and then it had to pause for a while before it came higher. And then of course it didn't go much higher. So that's something to keep in mind too. But this projection also gives us a date, and that would be into September. From the major low to the major high, that took this long basically, which comes out to be September 2025. So it'll be interesting to see if we have a significant turning point in September. It might actually be a low. So we may come up here and we may actually, see a low and then go on even higher into quarter 4. Okay, so I think that's about what I had on this chart, except for, of course, the bearish case. What's the bearish case here? I have these 50% levels marked up saying, yep, we are in weak territory as far as this move goes. consolidating under the 50% level, which is not a strong place to be as far as this move goes. But in the overall move that we've had since April, we're still consolidating in the strong half of this. And, prices, as far as I'm concerned, can still come down to around this 50% level and this old trend line and still be in a position of strength. And it's not going to feel like it. And the rest of the market is going to be convinced that, we've had a triple top and it's over. And that could very well be, but until we see lower highs below this level, I'm not convinced. So I think we're in strength until this happens. So anything in the news, anything that you're hearing, other than that, in my opinion, is basically noise. And markets take a long time to get where they're going. And so, we shouldn't really, if we've been bullish for the last, I mean, shit, we were bullish here. I was bullish here. In fact, I was very bullish right here because there were major signals marking a bottom. Like we had basically the sentiment was that of a bear market low, so the sentiment has fully reset. And I've been preaching and going on and on about it. And then it's basically been up only since with a little pause. So, we have to have breakdowns of these larger moves in order to get bearish as far as I'm concerned. So that's something I wanted to show, but I also wanted to show we do have a little double top in play. And so again, I want to show how I use this tool, not to try to predict price, but just to see what can the market do and where does it, how does it typically move. So what I've done is I've projected this move off of here, basically, right? And so 100% of the move would obviously be coming down to this point, and we're consolidating above the 50% level as far as the double top goes. And so that kind of also gives us, we're in a sign of strength as far as this pattern goes. If this breaks down, the next target would be this level, and then the next target from there would be the 1.5, meaning 150% of this move gets us down here. And there's a lot of confluence and a lot of support down here with this 50% level, these major bottoms, and this trend line. And so if prices get down to here and we have, and prices can wick down to these levels, but we want closes and lower highs or higher lows to form above these levels if that comes into play. So this entire move down, we're not going to worry about it. It's not going to feel good, especially in our altcoins. And in fact, I might get liquidated on a few of my trading positions because I may have been a little too early. But that's the way it goes. That's why we have stop losses in play, even though I'm fully allocated in that account. So we're just going to have to see. But there were many reasons during this time for me to assume higher prices. So one thing that I've talked about on the channel that I haven't actually gone into is the ISM, which is a manufacturing index. And as basic as I can put it, and as basically as I really understand it, is that this kind of tracks the business cycle. And anything below this 50 mark is considered contraction. Anything above it is considered expansion. And this entire bull market, we've been below 50 on the ISM, technically in contraction. And I wanted to add, let's see if I have it on here. I do. I have my Bitcoin chart here, and I wanted to just do a little exercise. Let's give this a little bit more room. And I just wanted to do a little exercise, and we'll mark up the top of the Bitcoin chart here, the cycle tops, and just kind of see how does the ISM play into this, and can we gather any actionable information from this chart. And first thing I want to point out is that the peak of Bitcoin has basically happened right around the peak of the ISM during its cycles. Now, this is interesting to note that this double top here we had, the ISM actually peaked exactly pretty much on the day, right where Bitcoin topped here. And now, even though the ISM top didn't mark the top of the cycle as it did basically back here and roughly here within a very short period of time. We saw the last cycle was, even though the ISM peaked here, we had a higher high on Bitcoin, basically just slightly higher prices, but the ISM was much lower and forming lower highs. So we were already getting that divergence there, seeing the weakness in the ISM, even though prices were just a little bit higher. And it was basically downhill from there. You can see the ISM tanked and Bitcoin tanked. And but we have been climbing steadily higher as the ISM has been consolidating in this lower contracted area. That's something that gives me a higher confidence that we haven't seen the top yet, because we've never seen a Bitcoin cycle top while the ISM has been below 50. And Raoul Pal talks about this. He's actually the guy who got me onto this. He's a good guy to follow. He's a macro guy, kind of a macro, guru sort of guy. And and he talks about this at length, and how he believes that this particular cycle we're going to top out in the later, like we're like it's going to be loaded on the back end. Like when this takes off, we've already seen higher prices, but we're gonna see things really take off in the later half of the cycle. So that'll be interesting to see if that ends up playing out. Something else that Raoul Pal talks about all the time and is really flooded, and it's flooded YouTube, the YouTube space, is the M2 money supply. And meanwhile, people are arguing over, is it a 74-day lead or an 80-day or a 10-week or a 12-week, or which one correlates the most. I know that there's an answer out there somewhere mathematically that that is more correlated, and that's none of my business. The one that Raoul Pal talks about all the time is the 12-week lead. And the main point is that Bitcoin's movements are 80 to 90% correlated with the M2 money supply. So that's another thing. Like, ignore the news, strip out all the bullshit. Everything else is noise. As you can see from this chart, does it call it perfectly? Well, no, but in general, when the M2 money supply is going down, Bitcoin goes down, and when the M2 money supply is going up, Bitcoin goes up. And I've gone back and kind of looked over this, and it is very correlated. And so it can definitely give you a roadmap. So what I'm saying for here is, well, we've broken into fresh highs in the M2 money supply. I expect that we will break into fresh highs on the Bitcoin chart. And we have some of this accelerated action coming up, maybe a pause in, June, July, and then it continues in August. So this will be interesting to see. Again, we have that, what do we have, that September projection on our speed line. It'll be interesting to see, we'll have a little bit of a lead. What happens, what we'll have to look forward to in September. Maybe we see the M2 starting to fall off. This is just kind of a good guide to see, where are we? And it tracks it very well. And so, as you can see, the M2 doesn't go up in a straight line. It would be unrealistic to assume that Bitcoin is going to go up in a straight line as well. Alrighty, moving on. Something I really like to see. Whoops, excuse me. Where are we at here? Okay, yeah. I meant to push this button. One thing that I do like to see is we are forming some higher lows here, which is exactly what I wanted to see. Early on, we had talked about this double bottom. We broke out of the double bottom. There were periods of time, although we were in low volume, that I was seeing prices rise with low volume, or excuse me, prices rising with volume rising. So it gave me a little bit more confidence that that was going to be sustainable, at least for the short term. That was very granular and very short term, and we were able to get into some trades and take some profits and everything like that. And in fact, I think on that challenge, I've basically withdrawn maybe 3 out of the 5K that I originally started with. So, it's only another $2,000 before we're essentially risk-free on that account, meaning that, it's all the house money essentially. And we had this breakout of the double top, and that was a good, nice sign. We were breaking into fresh highs, and then we just kind of been in a short-term downtrend, just bleeding slowly as the interest dies off, and everything. And so what I was saying, what I'm hoping to see is some macro higher lows. This was a little bit higher than that, and in fact, this right here was a little bit higher than this, right? So we're just subtly seeing that we're bottoming slightly higher every time. And so, I'm waiting to see if maybe we can actually continue to break out of this larger downtrend. We do have some higher lows forming, and we do have some higher highs, and we will just continue to see if we start getting higher highs again. Well, then we might be in a macro uptrend where we're going to see sustained uptrend in the exchange volume. And basically, the volume is the lifeblood of the markets. If you don't have that volume or interest in the market, it's not likely that it's going to sustain those prices for a very long period of time. And I've gone over that multiple times in videos showing you on the charts what it looked like, where we had a lead that the exchange volume was dropping off while we were seeing higher prices. And everybody was thinking that it was going to continue on. But there was already that warning sign ahead of time that we might see some more downside. And effectively, this is the opposite is true, where everybody's very bearish, but we're seeing the subtle signs that the strength is coming back. So it is a little bit, it can be considered a little bit worrisome too, where the interest is is died off. Jason Pizzino actually just had a video, his most recent video, where he talks about this a little bit. I kind of take a different view in a way because it's effectively like the search volumes are at like 5-year lows, and typically that means the train's empty, I guess. And as they say, the train leaves empty, right? So, and if you actually, another thing that happened this week is Tom Lee had an interview, and he was talking about how if you missed the top performing 10 days in the S&P 500, you actually were at a loss. So that's something to really consider. It's not even about being a master trader or this and that. You can make money doing that. It's like you got to be there for the ride, because most of the gains happen in a very short period of time. The markets spend 80% of their time deciding where to go and 20% getting there. So if you're not in the markets for that 20% of the time, it seems like fucking forever if you're sitting at it, staring at it all day, wanting the number to go up. But if you're not in the market during those times that it actually is going up, then you can definitely be at a loss, or you're not going anywhere. So that's something that I thought was really interesting. Last thing that I will leave it off on, like I said, there's not really too much to report, so I just kind of wanted to go over some anecdotal things, and maybe just some interesting lessons that we can go over, I guess, things to think about. The last chart that I have here for me that I'm waiting for, and I basically don't have much to report on until this happens, is we're waiting for this chart to break out. Basically, this is the others dominance divided by the Bitcoin dominance, basically saying how is the overall crypto market doing compared to Bitcoin. And as you can see, over the last, well, let's put it on a weekly chart. It's a little bit easier to see. Over the last, several years, basically altcoins have just completely bled to Bitcoin. It was not advantageous to be in alts, except for we did have this nice little rally from November to December last year, made a shit ton of money, gave it all back. That's why these charts are so important. I mean, I did the same thing, actually. Made a shit ton of money, gave it back, thinking that, oh, this is the point where, let me just draw a line here. It's like, okay, this is great. We've broken out of this area, and here we go. But then the warning sign was we broke below and basically formed lower highs below that area, basically invalidating that breakout. And if you were paying attention, you'd have seen it, and maybe you'd have saved some of your money. But that is unlikely. Most people don't, because every time this thing pumps a little bit, people are convinced that it's altcoin season and we're on. When altcoin season actually looks like this, where it's a very brief period of time where the altcoins outperform Bitcoin. And so what I've learned this cycle is that if you're in altcoins for the whole ride, it's very hard to make money, because you should just be in Bitcoin, because effectively there's just very short periods of time where it outperforms. And so you don't want to be in the market for 3 years waiting for this 1 year period where the alts go crazy. So it's like, stick it into Bitcoin. And then when this thing shows its signs, I mean, shit, we could have, maybe we could have made some money here. I mean, we did. But if we were paying attention, we'd have kept it, I guess, And so anyway, the last final hope for this altcoin season is to break out of this pattern here, potentially to the upside. I think most likely to the upside, based on liquidity coming in and the ISM. And it's not a huge. It's always dangerous to play the macro guru guy, because honestly, to think that I know more about the market than the market does is insane. I mean, people, like businesses, spend billions of dollars on research that dictate their choices. Now, those choices do come up in a price chart, and if you can learn how to read the charts, you don't necessarily need to be macro guru guy. But I do like to have a few things that I look at to give me some kind of compass or guide on like, where are we in this cycle? Well, we're below 50 on the ISM, and historically cycles haven't topped there. So does that give me a little bit more conviction to hold? Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've done. That's basically what I've done. So, and we can go back here for the last bear market of the alts. We basically had a similar pattern playing out. This was more of a channel, but once it broke out, the altcoins took off. And of course, they give it back. So you have to be setting your stops below the market. You could have got out right here and then waited, and then you could have got back in right here. I mean, you'd have missed all this pain. You'd have missed, and yeah, sure, you'd have missed that chunk, but you'd have a little bit confirmation. In fact, you could have bought on a retest here and then on and on from there. So I think at least with the altcoins and stuff like that, later, especially later in the cycle, things are going to get more volatile, which can potentially give us, volatility to the upside. That's what we're all hoping for. That's kind of what I'm waiting for right here. So we're just gonna have to see how this pans out. Hopefully as the M2 money supply increases and money starts coming back into space, hopefully we see some more upside. This is the big one. ETH BTC. It's basically been down only for years, and then we finally had a little bit of life come back into this thing. Seems to be consolidating above this zone in relatively strong territory, and we're just going to have to see how that pans out too. Typically, in the past, and what's preached online all the time is the path to altcoin season, where money goes into Bitcoin first, and then it finds itself into Ethereum, and then into the large caps, and then into the mid micro caps, things like that. Maybe capital will flow the same this particular cycle. It's hard to say. It really is hard to say. But I do know that we are kind of at historic lows here, where the ETH BTC has typically gone before it's gone on its rally. I mean, we went home. We basically made it. Ben Cohen talks about this. We have this zone down here, basically right in here, and we've touched it, and we've kind of been, we had a nice sharp bounce from there, and we'll see. I'd like to see us start breaking some of these tops and start climbing higher on the ETH BTC chart. I think that's that in conjunction with the others chart breaking out is going to be a good sign. And then the last thing I'll leave us on, because I know this has kind of just been a blah blah, is the USDT dominance. Again, been talking about this forever. We were on this support band here that we've just held above, and we haven't broken down from this. The ultra mega bullish degenerate, phase would be breaks below this and start breaking below, this as well. And I've gone before in other videos on what all this mess is, and I can go over it again someday if I need to. But yeah, until then, we're actually seeing some strength a little bit temporarily in the short term in the USDT dominance chart. And so until we actually break down from these levels, I mean, it's just, I wouldn't expect anything to see. We're kind of in a rock and a hard place. We're in weak territory as far as this move goes, which is a good place to be. But we're also, as far as our projection here from this move, we are in the stronger half of this particular move. And yeah, so that's just something to keep this move projected, I guess, right? But it's still in overall weak territory underneath this trend line, underneath this 50% level and this 50% level. So really what we'd like to see, hopefully in the next few weeks, is a breakdown of this level and see if we can actually start breaking some of this resistance. And then that will be that along with the others chart breaking out to the upside, I think will be making everybody feel a little bit better, and I think that will basically get us into more of a belief phase. I think we're kind of in a disbelief phase right now, as far as the sentiment goes. These things happen over time. Like there's major, the whole major cycle has these major feelings as you go, but in that cycle, there are many cycles of disbelief and euphoria and things like that. So I think basically we're going to be going from disbelief into belief here soon. It's always the worst when markets are at their lows, because it just feels like shit to buy. Like I entered a couple of positions a while back, and it just didn't feel good because obviously prices are going down, and they went down a little bit more, from there, and it just doesn't necessarily feel good. You're not in the business of trying to call the bottoms of the tops. You're in the business of trying to make money. And if everybody's convinced that it's going lower, it's probably not going lower. If everybody's convinced that it's going up, you might be cooked. So anyway, I think that's all I have for this market update. Hopefully you found that valuable. Please, if you found this valuable, or if you made it this far, leave a comment, leave a like. Any comment will do. Honestly, just a thanks, a thumbs up, anything telling me that you've made it this far, that you find this valuable, and leave me any kind of criticism that you can think of, what you like, what you don't like. I know my videos run a little bit long, but I also only do this once a week, and hopefully that's helpful. I like to just try to condense as much as I can into one little weekly video, and cut out a lot of the noise. There's a lot of noise. I'm in this 24/7. There's a lot of noise during the week. And if you can avoid all that crap and just, zoom out a little bit and take your time, I think that's where the money's made. So anyhow, come along for the journey, man. We'll keep chugging along, hopefully stay on the right side of these markets.